My parents kicked me out of the house on Thanksgiving, so I froze their credit cards and watched their lives fall apart. My name is Olivia Vance, and I'm 32. I work as a marketing manager for a well-established advertising agency in the Loop, downtown Chicago. The job is creative and demanding, but I love it. And more importantly, it provides me with a steady income, enough to live independently in a nice rented apartment in Lincoln Park and take care of my own future. I'm single, have no children, and have always tried to maintain the image of a dutiful daughter and successful person in the eyes of my parents, Richard and Carol Vance. Even though deep down, our relationship has always been rocky, especially when it comes to money, or rather, their spending habits. But all my efforts and silent suffering went up in smoke on the day that should have been a day of reunion and gratitude: Thanksgiving. The aroma of roast turkey and the sweet aroma of pumpkin pie filled the spacious, cozy kitchen of my parents' spacious two-story house in Naperville, a well-to-do suburb of Chicago. Outside the window, the last maple leaves of autumn rustled in the pale afternoon sunlight. It was a seemingly perfect Thanksgiving scene, cut out of some home magazine. Except that picture perfection did not include me standing in the doorway, a thick wool coat hastily slung over my arm, shivering not just from the cold, but also from shock and hurt. Across from me, my father, Richard Vance, a 62-year-old man who prided himself on his good looks, stood there, red with anger, his index finger pointing unsteadily toward the sky. "Get out of this house right now!" His angry voice rang out, drowning out the noisy laughter of the relatives gathered in the living room. "We don't need an ungrateful daughter like you. How dare you come back here to lecture your parents about how to spend money on a holiday?" Ungrateful, me? My mother, Carol, 60, a woman with carefully styled blonde hair who always maintained a gentle appearance, stood huddled behind my father, her eyes avoiding mine, her lips pressed together, shaking her head slightly as if I were the one who had made all the mistakes. The reason for this outburst? The reason I was kicked out of the house at Thanksgiving dinner? Just minutes earlier, in the kitchen, I had tried to speak as quietly and privately as possible, expressing my extreme concern about the enormous credit card debt, nearly $30,000, that was growing on my American Express Platinum card. The card that I had, in a moment of weakness and perhaps stupidity nearly 6 years ago, agreed to add my parents as authorized users. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me, the lock clicking dryly, pushing me out onto the porch into the chill of the late November afternoon. The cold wind seeped through my thin coat, but the chill came from my heart. The hot tears I had been holding back finally spilled over, streaming down my cheeks. Ungrateful? I was the ungrateful child? I who had been quietly paying the minimum payments on that very card for months, just to keep my credit score from being ruined by their reckless spending? Fine. They want me gone. I will go. But the dangerous and irresponsible financial game they are playing on my reputation and my name must end. Immediately. Now. The story of this disastrous credit card began about 6 years ago, when I was 26 and just starting to make steady progress in my marketing career. My parents were having a temporary financial crisis. At least that's how they explained it to me. I later learned that the real reason was probably because my father, Richard, a retired business consultant, had made a few unsuccessful stock investments that he had kept secret. Or maybe it was because my mother, Carol, who had always been fond of buying expensive branded items to maintain her image, was spending beyond her means. As a result, both of their credit scores took a huge hit. They couldn't get new credit cards, and their old ones were nearly maxed out. But instead of facing reality, cutting back on spending, and adjusting their lifestyle, they turned to me, their only daughter, who had a steady job and a good credit history. "Olivia," my dad said one weekend over dinner, his voice dripping with false concern. "You know, our credit score has been a little shaky lately because of the changes in the market. It's temporary. But we have some flexible expenses coming up, like a roof repair. How about you add us to one of your good credit cards? Just as a secondary user, for ease of payment. We promise we'll only use it when absolutely necessary and we'll pay off our bills each month. Don't worry." My mother sat next to me and nodded in agreement. "That's right, daughter. Just in case. Can you help us this time? Consider it as..." She hesitated, then continued in a sweet voice. Consider it as a little filial piety from you. Filial piety. Those two words were like a drug. I, a daughter who always tried to please my parents, always felt responsible for taking care of them, softened. Although I was a bit hesitant, but after their convincing and firm promise, I agreed. I called American Express and requested 2 additional cards on my Platinum account for Richard and Carol Vance. It was one of the worst decisions of my life. At first, it seemed like everything was going as they promised. They used the card for a few small purchases, and I think they paid for them themselves. But then, over time, that convenience began to be abused. My Amex Platinum became their primary payment method for nearly everything they did. It ranged from small purchases like grocery shopping at Whole Foods and filling up the gas tank of Dad's luxury SUV to much larger purchases. The new 80-inch curved TV that replaced the old one that was in perfect condition, Mom's clothes from Nordstrom and Neiman Marcus, the expensive dinners at fine dining restaurants in downtown Chicago that they proudly showed off to their friends. And the culmination of all that was vacationing, which I knew was far beyond their means. A cruise to Alaska in the summer, a weekend at a luxury spa resort in Napa Valley. When I looked at my monthly credit card statements, the balance kept climbing, from a few $1,000s to tens of thousands, then $20,000, and most recently it was approaching $30,000. I tried talking to them many times. At first, it was just gentle reminders. Mom and Dad, I spent a lot this month, didn't I? Why don't we try to make a budget? But my efforts were like a drop in the ocean. My father often brushed it off with an annoyed look. Oh, why are you worrying so much? Money is a small matter. The important thing is to live happily. We know what we're doing. Or worse, he used a sarcastic tone. Now that you've earned money, you look down on your old parents, right? You have the responsibility to take care of them a little. My mother always played the passive peacemaker. Come on, don't stress your father out. He's worked hard all his life. He deserves to enjoy himself a little. Besides, using your card is just for convenience, and we'll pay him back. But that payback day never seemed to come. Instead, the balance kept growing, and the interest started to compound at an alarming rate. I was in a dilemma. I didn't want to fight with my parents. I didn't want to destroy the image of a harmonious family. But I also couldn't continue to indulge in irresponsible spending habits that were directly destroying my credit score and my financial future. I had secretly used my savings to make the minimum monthly payments for the last 3 months, just to prevent my card from being reported as delinquent to the credit bureaus. It was money I had planned to use to pay for a down payment on an apartment of my own, a dream I had long cherished. And then Thanksgiving came. A few days before, I got an email from American Express warning me that my Platinum card was about to hit its $30,000 credit limit. I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. I had to have a conversation, set a final limit. I chose a time before dinner, when everyone was in the living room, to pull my parents into the kitchen, hoping to talk privately. I tried to keep my voice as calm as possible, showing them the warning email from the bank and the specific debt on the most recent statement. Look, I began. My Amex balance is almost $30,000 and I'm close to maxing out. The interest rates are really high. This is seriously affecting my credit score. I really can't let this go on. I'm asking you to stop using this card immediately. And we need to sit down and come up with a plan to pay it off. I thought that by presenting the problem frankly and offering a cooperative solution, they would understand. But I was wrong. My father, instead of facing the truth, took my words as a personal insult. His pride was hurt. What did you say? His face turned red. Stop using the card? Make a payment plan? Who do you think you are to lecture your parents? You think you're so smart just because you earn a few pennies? It's Thanksgiving, a family reunion, and you're here to pick a fight over some petty money matter? This is no small matter, Dad, I tried to explain. It directly affects my future. Your future is yours to worry about, my father shouted, his anger spiraling out of control. If you find it so unpleasant, then get out of this house. Get out of here right now. We don't need an ungrateful daughter like you. And that's how I was kicked out of my house by my own parents on Thanksgiving Day, in front of my relatives, just because I dared to speak the truth about the alarming financial situation they caused on my credit card. I sat silently in my car parked on the side of the road a few blocks from my parents' house. The chill of the late November afternoon was penetrating my skin, but not as cold as the feeling in my heart. The tears had stopped falling. Instead, there was a terrifying emptiness, quickly filled with a cold anger, a steely determination I never knew I had. The hurt had reached its limit. My blind filial piety had been brutally trampled upon. Not only had they abused my trust, they had also humiliated me, blaming me for the problems they had created. They wanted me gone? Fine. But they could no longer continue to live a life of false luxury based on my creditworthiness. In that cold car, under the yellow streetlights, I pulled out my phone. I didn't call my friends to cry. I didn't call my Aunt Susan to vent. I found the American Express customer service number printed on the back of the platinum card in my wallet. The call was connected fairly quickly. After verifying my identity through a series of security questions as the primary cardholder, I spoke to the operator in an unusually calm voice, without a hint of hesitation. Hello, this is Olivia Vance, Platinum Cardholder number. Card number. I would like to report that the 2 supplementary cards issued to Mr. Richard Vance and Ms. Carol Vance are no longer under my control and have shown suspicious spending activity. I request that both supplementary cards be blocked immediately, effective immediately. The operator looked a little surprised but followed the procedure. Yes, Ms. Vance, I have placed a request to block the 2 supplementary cards in the names of Richard Vance and Carol Vance. These cards will no longer be able to make any transactions. Would you like to request a new card? No, thank you. Just lock them, I replied. I hung up, feeling a rush of adrenaline run down my spine. It was a sense of power, of control. I followed that up with calls to Chase and Citibank, where I also had a couple of other credit cards that my parents had occasionally borrowed. I asked to have them removed from all of my accounts. When it was all done, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders for the past 6 years. I didn't go back to my apartment in Lincoln Park right away. I needed time to collect my thoughts. I drove to my best friend Laura's house, who welcomed me with open arms without much question. I stayed at Laura's house for a few days, trying to ignore the constant missed calls and texts from my parents' phone. At first, the messages were angry and confusing. Olivia, why isn't my Amex working? What did you do? Reactivate it. Then the tone became more confused when they tried to use other cards. Honey, what's wrong with the credit cards? I'm at the supermarket and I can't pay for anything. Can you double-check if there's a mistake? Finally, when it became clear that it wasn't a technical problem, the tone became pleading, blaming, even threatening. Olivia, you can't do this to us. You have to reactivate the card now. Don't you love us? I read all those messages with a heavy heart but a determination. I didn't reply. I knew if I gave in this time, things would go back to the way they were. I had to be strong, for myself. In the end, I decided to block both of their numbers. I needed peace. The next few days passed in tense silence on my part and perhaps increasing chaos on my parents' part. The drama of the collapse of their lavish, credit-based lifestyle began to unfold, and I, even from a distance, could picture every scene. The first scene probably took place on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. I can imagine my parents, in their usual neat and tidy attire, eagerly heading to big malls like Woodfield Mall or Oakbrook Center to hunt for bargains. A bigger TV, a new set of golf clubs for Dad, the latest designer handbag for Mom. And then, at the checkout counter, they confidently flashed their familiar Amex Platinum or Visa signature cards they had been mercilessly swiping for years, only to receive a disapproving shake of the head from the cashier. Sorry, sir, your card has been declined. Their initial confusion turned to embarrassment, then anger as they tried other cards and got the same result. The image of a wealthy, elegant, middle-aged couple suddenly became pathetic and awkward amid the bustling crowd of shoppers. Then came the Christmas shopping season. Plans for a sunny Florida beach vacation to escape the Chicago chill. Expensive Christmas gifts for friends and former colleagues to maintain the facade of success. All went up in smoke. The abundant credit they had always considered theirs was locked away. They were forced to face a harsh reality, living on cash or debit cards, if they had any left. This exposed the stark reality of their financial straits that they had tried so hard to hide. The lavish lifestyle they had become accustomed to came to an abrupt halt. No more frequent dinners at fancy restaurants. No more impulse shopping trips to expensive stores. No more spontaneous weekend trips. They had to start counting their pennies, cooking more at home, cutting back on all non-essential spending. And inevitably, financial stress began to eat away at Richard and Carol's relationship. From what I heard through Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, the only family member with whom I had any limited contact, arguments began to erupt more frequently in the Naperville house. They blamed each other for the situation. My father blamed my mother for spending too much. My mother blamed my father for losing money in investments and having too much self-esteem. And they both blamed me, claiming that I was the filial son who had ruined their lives with my cruel act of revenge. The facade of a happy, prosperous family they had worked so hard to build began to crack and crumble from within. But the truth was even worse than I had imagined. About a month after Thanksgiving, Aunt Susan called me, her voice filled with concern and concern. She wasn't calling to defend her sister or brother-in-law. She was calling because she was genuinely concerned about their situation and perhaps wanted me to understand the bigger picture. "Olivia," she began, her voice faltering, "I know you're angry with your parents and I don't blame you, but they're in a much worse situation than you think." Aunt Susan revealed a truth I had never known. It turned out that my credit card abuse was just the tip of the iceberg. My parents were drowning in other debts they had kept hidden. The loan on my dad's SUV was coming due, and they couldn't pay it. Several credit cards in their own names were long maxed out with exorbitant interest rates. And worst of all, they had secretly taken out a second mortgage on their Naperville home a few years ago to support their lifestyle, and now they were struggling to make the monthly payments. Freezing those cards was more than just cutting off their luxury spending. It was like taking away their last financial lifeline, pushing them to the brink of true bankruptcy and the risk of losing their home. Now I understand why my dad reacted so angrily and out of control on Thanksgiving. Maybe he was scared, afraid that I would discover the full truth of this debt if I started prying into the money. What's more, when I curiously reviewed the details of my old Amex card statements before I locked them, another fact reinforced my decision. Most of the indulgent spending that they always said was worth it after a lifetime of hard work was not about things that brought real value or memorable family memories. It was the huge sums of money spent on membership fees and expensive parties at my father's private golf club. It was my mother's collection of designer handbags, purchased almost weekly on luxury retail websites. It was the generous tips to the waiters just to show off their fake wealth to their friends. That vanity and selfishness left me with no sympathy left. After a few weeks of silent resignation and perhaps desperate attempts, my parents finally managed to get in touch with me. They couldn't call me directly because I had blocked their number, so they asked Aunt Susan to act as a go-between and beg her to convince me to answer the phone. Out of respect for her, I agreed to talk on the phone, but I was prepared. The call started as I expected. First, my father's tone was angry. He poured out a long string of reproaches, blaming me for putting them in this miserable situation, that I was a heartless, cold-blooded child. When he saw that I was just listening silently without any reaction, his voice began to soften, turning to pleading, complaining about the difficulties they were facing, about how they were about to run out of money to go to the market, about the electricity being cut off. My mother also joined in with sobs and emotional words. "Olivia, please love your parents. We know our mistakes. Can you reopen the card for us to use temporarily for this month? We promise to spend carefully, to record every penny. But I am different today. I am no longer the 26-year-old girl who is easily swayed by promises or tears. 6 years of broken trust and the shock of Thanksgiving have forged me into a necessary toughness." "No," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "I will not open any more cards. It's over." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then my father's voice growled, "So what do you want us to do? Starve to death on the streets?" "I don't want this," I continued, keeping my voice even. "But I can't let this ruin my future any longer. If you really want to change, if you want us to be able to see each other again, then these are my terms." I took a deep breath, then said each word clearly, not giving them a chance to interrupt. "First, you need to face the truth about your financial situation. Collect all your bills, sit down together, and create a detailed spending, saving, and debt repayment plan. If necessary, seek out an independent financial advisor. I'd be happy to recommend one if you'd like. Second, you must call all of your credit card companies and request that your name be removed from their authorized user lists. You will need written confirmation from the banks of this. From now on, you will no longer be responsible for any legal or credit risk related to your spending. And third, I paused. This was the hardest, but also the most important condition for me. You have to admit that you were wrong. Wrong for abusing my trust, wrong for spending irresponsibly on my credit card, and wrong for kicking me out of the house on Thanksgiving. You need to give me a sincere apology, not because I need it to forgive you, but because it is what you need to start changing. After I finished speaking, the other end of the line was silent. I could hear my father's heavy breathing. Finally, he hung up without saying another word. That was the last time we spoke directly about the matter. I learned from Aunt Susan that my parents had not accepted my conditions. Their high self-esteem and stubbornness prevented them from admitting their mistakes or seeking professional help. They continued to try to make ends meet on their own, borrowing more from other relatives, but not much, selling the few pieces of jewelry that belonged to my mother. But those efforts were a drop in the bucket compared to the mountain of debt they had created. The inevitable consequences eventually came. About 6 months after that fateful Thanksgiving, I heard that they had put their Naperville house up for sale. It was the only way they could pay off the second mortgage and some of their other credit card debt before the bank foreclosed. They sold their house, but after deducting debts and expenses, the money left was nothing. They were forced to move into a smaller, older rental apartment in a far more remote and less convenient area. The lavish lifestyle, the showy gatherings with friends, the expensive vacations, all became history. Their lives were truly broken, not because of me, but because of their own irresponsible choices and habits over the years. My credit freeze simply lifted the curtain on that harsh truth, forcing them to face the natural consequences of their actions. Justice, in this case, does not come from a court or a law. It comes from the simple law of cause and effect. They sowed the wind, and now they will reap the whirlwind. My relationship with them is probably damaged beyond repair. Aunt Susan says they still hold a grudge against me, but perhaps somewhere deep down they also recognize some of their own mistakes. The future may offer a slim chance of healing, but only if they truly change and learn to respect the boundaries I worked so hard to establish. It's been a year since that tumultuous Thanksgiving. My life has changed for the better. After cutting off the financial and emotional burden of my parents, I feel lighter and freer than ever. My credit score is secure. I'm more focused on my career and was recently promoted to regional marketing director at my company. I've started to spend more time on myself, traveling to dream destinations on my own dime, taking a pottery class on the weekends, and even starting a new relationship with a kind, respectful, financially independent man. My Lincoln Park apartment is now filled with light and laughter. I've learned the hard way about setting boundaries, even with the people I love the most. I've learned that being filial doesn't mean sacrificing your own future and happiness to tolerate the irresponsibility of others. Loving your family is important, but so is loving and protecting yourself. The sadness of my broken relationship with my parents still lingers, occasionally throbbing, especially around the holidays. But the guilt has completely disappeared. Instead, there is peace and pride in myself for standing up for myself, for making a difficult but necessary decision. The satisfaction comes not from seeing their lives fall apart, but from the freedom and strength I have regained for myself. That Thanksgiving was the day I lost my illusion of a perfect family, but it was also the day I truly found myself, my self-worth, and my autonomy. Freezing those credit cards was more than just an act of financial self-defense. For me, it was a declaration of independence. It proved that sometimes the hardest, but also the most necessary love is the love and respect we have for ourselves. Financial boundaries between parents and adult children are always a sensitive and complicated issue. Where is the limit of filial piety? When does help become a burden, even abuse? Have you ever faced a similar dilemma, having to make a difficult decision to protect your own financial and emotional future from excessive dependence or demands from relatives? How did you handle it? Please share your story and perspective.